Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Speak Freely podcast. My name's Emma Dunwell, and today we'll be joined by someone who I have interviewed before, but not on this channel. So I'm pleased to introduce you all to investigative journalist Warren Thornton. Thanks so much for joining me, Warren.
Thank you very much for having me, Emma. Pleasure to be here.
So, first of all, for anyone who isn't familiar with you or your work, could you just give everyone a bit of a rundown of what it is that you do?
Yeah, sure. I used to be a former military sniper for 6 years in the British Army. And then I spent 8 years looking after people in war-torn areas as protection. So we were in war zones 7 or 8 years. And then, of course, after that, I became sort of known as the journalist who got arrested for malinformation. Now, disinformation is when you know something is false and you publish it. Misinformation is when you don't know something is false and you publish it. But malinformation is when you know something to be true, but they don't want it in the public eye. And I was the journalist who basically turned around and said that there was a standing ovation in the Canadian Parliament was given to a known Nazi. And of course, what happened then was very, very simply, I got arrested for it. They released me. And in the end, it was such a scandal that the Speaker of the Canadian Parliament had to resign.
Yeah, wow. I mean, and I saw that video, and at the time that it was going around, everyone was literally watching it going like, what the hell is happening? Is this guy actually saying what we think he's saying? So I do want to get more into, because I know the Nazi in Parliament story, as people have coined it, has kind of, I suppose, come to pass. But considering where we are now politically, we're about roughly a year further on in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and now anyone right wing is being called a Nazi. So I think that there's an interesting aspect that we could definitely revisit that. But just to begin with, what was it that initially brought you from humanitarian and military service? What was it that made you think, no, I need to maybe dabble in a bit of journalism?
Well, I made a lot of contacts, military, embassy, and of course you have attaches who attach themselves to embassy who are nothing of the sort. You know, they're either CIA, MI6, people like that. And of course, I had aid workers, journalists, and everything else. So I built up a lot of contacts over the years. And then, of course, they've risen to positions of fairly high power. And what they've done, they contacted me and said, "What are you doing these days?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing health and safety." And they said, "Well, have you thought of actually going back into journalism?" And I said, "Well, no, not really." I said, "Look, we've got a story here." So, of course, I started breaking those stories for them, really, because they were not in a position to do it, where they would have, they're basically a whole group of whistleblowers who let me know what's going on. So I decided to take it up again. And of course, started breaking stories. And luckily, I think our success rate on breaking stories is about 94%. I think we have on our stories being factually correct
Wow.
and ahead of time. So
That's really impressive. And does your history in military service and humanitarian work, how has that shaped your work as a journalist? Because you have a niche that other people maybe don't have.
yeah, absolutely. It is very much in the, when we started to do it, we said that we would tell the blunt truth, whether that was whether people liked it or not. We would actually come out with the truth, and the whole idea, when you see a lot of mainstream media and some alternative media receives quite a bit of money not to talk about certain issues, and we said that we would never duck anything. And once we'd verified that our stories were correct, we would put them out there. So it was a case of we will be as independent and as impartial as humanly possible. And if that meant in certain things where we were calling out certain things as bad, for instance, with the Nigel Farage story, I'm not a big fan of Farage. We believe him to be controlled opposition and not really for the people, as most politicians are. But in this case, you know, when you've got a 49-year-old story of a young boy who's 12, it's quite clearly a witch hunt. So in that case, we were able to present the story, even though personally I don't believe in Farage. I was able to present it as unfair to Farage, and I think that's the way every journalist should be.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's that sense of unbiased reporting, and people say all the time there is no such thing as unbiased, which to an extent I think that is could be true. I mean, everyone has an opinion, no matter how much you
Yeah.
try and say you don't. Everyone has an opinion. It's just how you present that in the story, and then how you allow that narrative to play out, which kind of ties into my next question. Is obviously over the years. I mean, it's been going on for decades and decades and decades. But over the years, government corruption and establishment corruption is something that has become much more available to the public eye. So I was wondering about how your contacts from all of these backgrounds, these are some brilliant people that you're bringing. How did that help kind of shape your network and the kind of stories that you focused on?
Well, it helped me to understand where they were coming from. And we normally have two very great big values. First of all, follow the money. Who's sponsoring these people? Where are they receiving their money from? Whether that be in America or any other parliament, to have a look, because 9 times out of 10, a politician is just there to con a block of people into voting for them. And of course, he's not independent because he has to toe the party line. And the problem that we have with that is to always follow the money. And the other thing to always follow is the timing of these events. Why are they speaking now? Why is this happening at this moment? And basically, what happens from there is it leads you to the truth more often than not. And of course, with the inside information that we get, we're able to put all those things together in a complete package, and then be able to break the story.
Yeah, and then obviously you said before, I mean, you were arrested for malinformation, but there is a lot of misinformation out there, disinformation, all of the
Yes.
like. Has your military service and your kind of, I suppose, you'd be more adept at handling a conflict zone. So has that played out in your ability to verify or kind of filter out the noise and the misinformation when it comes to reporting on conflict specifically?
Yes, absolutely. 'Cause the very first thing you must learn when you're in the middle of a conflict is both sides will lie. That's just the way it will be, and there will be propaganda out there. Now, we live in the West, so of course we will be, if you like, infested or infected by Western propaganda. There will be some of that that spills over. But my advice always is just to question absolutely everything. And if you question everything, no matter who's giving you the source, 9 times out of 10, you can then decide whether or not, and you can find out very quickly whether that's factual or it's just propaganda.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is how things like the Nazi in Parliament story came out, and how someone, unfortunately, these days, you have to be incredibly brave, like yourself, in order to break a story like that because of the clear legal ramifications that there are for telling the truth. How I know you briefly mentioned it just earlier on the episode, but I just want to get a bit more, delve a bit deeper into that story. How was it that you first happened upon it or started thinking there was something to look at?
Well, a friend of ours at the River House, which is MI6, that's the sort of term for it, uh, phoned me up. He sent me an email because we have to be very, very careful.
Yeah.
And they use burner phones to contact me. But they turned around and said, that, did you know that Yaroslav Hunker, he was the guy who got the standing ovation, um, was a prisoner of war in Great Britain during the Second World War? And I was like, how, okay. So he was a prisoner of war in Britain, so he must have been fighting for the Germans. Would I be correct in saying that? And of course, they turned around and said, yes, you are. And I said, can you give me any more details? And they gave me a few more that I was able to look at. And of course, the thing that really sort of stuck out for me was the fact that his son, Martin Hunker, ran or was the chief financial officer. It was very quickly found out he was the chief financial officer of one of Canada's biggest mining corporations, and donated money to the Speaker of the House. So the Speaker of the House, and literally Trudeau, Krista Freeland, who has a grandfather who was an absolute dyed in the wool Nazi, she was the deputy, and Gould, who was the should we say, the person who ran the House. Very much, they would have all known about his past, and because you do not, as a politician, you don't take a huge donation from somebody until you find out where it's come from,
Yeah.
because that is the sort of thing that can come back to bite you in the backside.
And what do you think it says about the Canadian establishment that they would have allowed? Because you just said they would have known. They would have known before any of it had even been able to come to fruition. So how would they allow that, and why would they allow it? Do you think that they expected people to find out?
Yes, well, the idea that they didn't know who that was, and that was the first thing that they turned around and said, they had no knowledge whatsoever, is complete nonsense, of course, because he was sitting directly opposite the chief of police, and directly sat next to him on the other side was the chief of Canadian intelligence. Now, the idea that neither of those knew who was sitting just across from Trudeau, who is obviously the Prime Minister of Canada, and would be allowed to get that close to them without them knowing is complete nonsense. And of course, we have to remember that when the Second World War finished, many of these, many of, shall we say, the Ukrainian neo-Nazis and border guards and everything else, went across to Canada under Operation Paperclip, which was a big movement by the USA and others to bring scientists from Germany, Ukraine, and various other places across. And of course, many of them settled in Ottawa. In fact, about 5 years ago, a local football team of 15-year-old children in Ottawa was actually taken to the school boards and literally remonstrated with because they threw up Nazi hand gestures before the start of the football game.
So maybe Nazism is alive and well in Canada. And, I mean, Trudeau is someone who is dabbled in blackface as well. So these are very controversial figures, and meeting together and then bolstering and platforming this other controversial figure. It's absolutely baffling. What do you think about it that it says about the establishment, the fact that it's almost like it's just a puppet show?
Yeah, there's very much an element of that, because after the story broke and this went completely viral and everybody was talking about it, they suddenly went into Canadian cemeteries and ripped down 325 of these monuments to these Ukrainians who had actually been buried there, who had, should we say, neo-Nazi past. They actually had cranes going into cemeteries and lifting out these monuments. So it is quite clear that they had, shall we say, a checkered past with that. And of course, Christopher Freeland, his grandfather was also a dyed-in-the-wool neo-Nazi. You have a look at the head now, Annalena Baerbock, who is the Secretary of the UN. Go and check into her grandfather's past. Go and have a look at Friedrich Merz. Go and have a look at Ursula von der Leyen. All of them have this trend running through. Kaya Kallas's father was a sympathizer and very much he hates Russia. So you have this long line of sort of Russophobia that goes right the way through the Canadian Parliament.
Yeah. Now, isn't it ironic that you were literally exposing Nazis, and then when you were arrested for doing this, correct me if I'm wrong, am I right in thinking that the charge was inciting racial hatred?
They were trying to say that it had some racial connotation to it, but the actual thing that I was arrested for was malinformation. Now, this is information that's true, but they don't think it's in the public interest. Now, I thought, and I very much argued that it was in the public interest.
Of
If
course.
somebody is giving a standing ovation to a neo-Nazi, everybody should know about it.
Yeah. And what were the racial connotations that they were trying to suggest? Because I'm racking my brains trying to think of what racial motivation you may have had if we are to believe their side. I wouldn't even see how that would logically work. You were exposing Nazis.
Yes, exactly that. There was no racial connotations, but it is one of those tropes, isn't it,
Yeah.
that you can turn around and say anti-Semite, racist, transphobe, whichever you like. It's one of these things you can just throw out there. And of course, how can I turn around and say that? Of course, to deny that it was racial would be to play along with their game, because there's no racism attached to this. You're talking about bad people. Now, you have to remember, this guy was part of the Galatians, the SS Galatians, which were a unit that went into Poland and committed all sorts of horrific war crimes on Polish citizens. And Poland is still waiting for a sorry from the Ukrainian government over the massacre of Volnia and various other places in Poland.
Wow. And what do you think this says about the historical, what I would call the whitewashing or the sugarcoating of Nazism, and especially more specifically where Nazism is today, because we're seeing, like I said earlier, we're seeing on the ground in the political sphere, we're seeing just everyday people being called Nazis because they think that we should have strong borders, you know, something like that.
Yeah.
And then on the other end of it, there's these theories that the Nazis, you know, they never died out and they were moved in and all this sort of stuff. So my thing is, it seems to be that the word Nazi politically is about the worst thing that you can throw at someone. It's the one thing that will get your career taken out from under you, everything. It can even get you arrested. And yet, when we actually try to delve into the Nazi history, specifically how it connotates with what goes on now in the West, it's shut down. Why do you think that is?
Well, they don't. It's an uncomfortable truth that they don't want you to know about. It's very much along the lines when, say, Israel do business with a Muslim terrorist group to cause atrocities elsewhere, namely Syria and maybe the Chinese Belt and Road as well, where they've happened. But when you look at the Ukrainians, I mean, Sky did a report the other day where they went underground into a bunker and were talking about the Azov battalion and how they were fighting the Russians. Now, the Azov battalion ideology is taken straight from the neo-Nazis. So you have the symbol of the dark sun, the Nazi dark sun, and the Waffen SS. They put those two symbols together, and of course, then they color them blue and yellow. And of course, that is the symbol for the Azov battalion, which Sky were praising the other day. So it's very much along those lines. And if you're willing to fight, it's like our enemy is our enemy's friend.
Yeah, it's a really strange political sphere at the moment. It's really bizarre. Moving on to your coverage of the Ukraine conflict, obviously, yeah, we can speak about the Nazi in Parliament and everything, but this conflict has, I suppose, for a few journalists, may describe it as a bit of a journey of information. Yeah. You start off and you're thinking like, right, it's this situation. And then all of a sudden it gets very, very, very complicated. So just for, you know, the person at home who is hearing about all this crap on the news, what is your assessment of the Ukrainian and Russian conflict and where it is now?
Okay, so it's a really, and you'll hear a lot of nonsense regarding this and a lot of propaganda. Now, back in 2014, the was Yanukovych was in charge. He was the democratically elected leader of Ukraine. Victoria Nuland and the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a very nice name for the CIA, decided they were going to overthrow the government. Now, we've seen this. They work very closely in hand with George Soros and the Open Society. Now, very simply, what you see is them going in. Look at what happened in Romania, where they wouldn't let the guy win the election who actually won it. Then you have Marine Le Pen not allowed to run. And this has happened in many countries where what happens is they use these NGOs to overthrow governments. And this is exactly what happened in Ukraine in the Maidan. In fact, Victoria Nuland, who was the Undersecretary of State at the time, was there handing out, you know, loaves of bread and all sorts while the riots were going on. So they overthrew that government. Now, the Russians saw that as as America taking over in Ukraine and installing a puppet government, which is what they did. And then for those next 8 years, those people, that government that they installed tried to clear out all the ethnic speaking Russians from the east in an area called the Donbass. So they were going in there, they were killing left, right, and center. Now, don't get me wrong. In a very short space of time, Luhansk and Donetsk, backed by Russia, decided to get their own militia and wanted self-determination and started fighting back at the amount of people that were being killed. And then in 2022, of course, when it looked like they were going to get defeated, the Russians said enough is enough and moved in to Ukraine to protect the people of there. Now, don't get me wrong. Not only that, it was not only that, but also because they refused to turn around and say that Ukraine will never become part of NATO. Now, if you look at the NATO encroachment moving east in 1990, Baker, who was the Secretary of State at the time, Shevardnadze, and Mikhail Gorbachev signed a declaration that said if a united Germany, when it was united, would be allowed to enter NATO, then America would not move NATO 1 inch further east. After that, they signed that declaration. You have to remember that 16 countries have since joined NATO, most of them surrounding Russia's border. And Ukraine was the red line. Now you can turn around and say Ukraine are no threat to Russia. What they're not seeing it from is Russia's side of the story. As far as they're concerned, it's an existential threat to Russia. And they said, if you cross this red line, we will have no choice. Now, you can turn around all you like and go, horrible Russians, this and that and the other. But imagine if we did this, say, in Alaska or Hawaii, or we did this on the Isle of Wight, and we did this in Scotland, and we started surrounding the UK. How would we react? How would the Americans react? Well, we know how the Americans reacted because it happened in one country, in Cuba. Here, Russia are being surrounded on all sides by many countries. This was always going to happen.
Yeah. And isn't it, you said about NATO actually moving, and, you know, all the countries that are just kind of surrounding Russia now, and hasn't NATO, isn't it like over 1,000 miles since 1990? I think
Yes.
they've actually moved closer to Russia after
Yes.
signing the declaration. So there is this sense of what you see in the mainstream media is like, okay, Russia is these big baddies and they're, you know, the poor little Ukrainians and everything like that. But then when you actually look into it a bit more, it's like, well, hang on. There are things that we've promised here that we have completely betrayed them on. We're expecting them not to react to lining up at the borders. Because I remember when the Russians were lining up on the borders and they hadn't gone in yet, and I remember seeing it on the TV, and I remember thinking like, well, they're obviously going to go in. And they were sat there, and the spokesman was still saying like, no, we're not going to invade. We're just patrolling, and everyone was going, oh, come off it. Obviously, you're going to go in. And then a couple of weeks later, But then that is essentially, they just did to Ukraine, just to play devil's advocate, they just did that to Ukraine what NATO and all these other countries had been doing to them since 1990. So what is the propaganda goal here? Is it just to make Russia out to be evil no matter what? Or is it money to Ukraine? What is the goal, do you think?
Well, the propaganda goal was to keep Russia well occupied while America went and got other places. Now there was a paper that was written by the Rand Corporation, which America took as their foreign policy, and that was to use a proxy to have a war with Russia to keep them entertained while America got on with, shall we say, wresting control of other countries. Certainly worked in Syria because the Russians pulled their troops out of Syria, and of course the Americans and the Israelis managed to use al-Jilani, who was actually wanted by America, to go in now as the new. They gave him a shiny new coat, and suddenly he's not a terrorist. He's a wonderful person. And of course, they struck Iran when they turned around and said, of course, that they've got nuclear weapons, which is our version, another version of weapons of mass destruction, which never actually materialized. And of course, we went into Iraq with. So there is this narrative that is always used, and America are now using it on Venezuela, saying they're all drug cartels and they're all terrible, and we're going to have to go in and we're going to have to bomb it. So there's always a reason. And of course, Europe was stupid enough to join in with America in literally fighting Russia, thinking that Russia would be an easy target. Well, Russia weren't an easy target. Russia not only fought back, but suddenly started winning and taking more and more ground. And of course, now Europe are desperately paying for this because America have just released a document saying that, Europe is a complete, should we say, Europe's completely finished. We need to walk away from this. Now, the only reason they're going to walk away from this is they're getting ready for a confrontation with China and surround China the same way that they did Russia. And there are two belts of this going from Taiwan round to the Philippines, all the way up to Malaysia. And then, of course, there's a deeper one with Japan involved as well. So the idea is to basically corral Russia, first of all, and now they want to go away and do the same with China. But they don't need a war in Russia to be going on. It's achieved its aims. Let's stop the conflict. But the trouble is, they've wound up Europe so much and put so many people who hate Russia in charge that Europe are very loath to do this because they've spent all their money. They're now trying to steal the Russian frozen assets so they can carry on this war. And of course, Ukraine has turned into the toilet that we thought it would do. And of course, the corruption inside Ukraine is rife and always has been. It was always in the top 10 most corrupt countries in the world before the war even started. So nothing much has changed there, except that America now, Europe are panicking because they have been talked into something quite bizarre. Now, just take this on board, if you would, Emma.
Yeah.
We are now in the West. We are now paying 2, 3, 4 times more for our oil, but we're getting it from America. And we're now buying all our weapons from America at 2, 3 times more, maybe even 10 times more than what it would cost if we'd have bought it from the Russians in the first place.
So it seems to me that all of this, I mean, even like you said with Venezuela, now everything that's going on, it seems to be everything is about planned provocation.
Yes.
And then what you just said about the oil, all of the things that happened as a result of the sanctions that were put on Russia that completely screwed us over here in the UK. I mean, I even remember, when fuel all of a sudden just completely shot up, and everyone was moaning, but everyone was still moaning at the Russians, which was ironic, right?
Yeah.
And then, what you said about the oil, now we're all getting it from America. So it's also a transfer of wealth on a massive scale, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just think about it. Trump's sitting there, sitting pretty, because now he's first of all he got NATO to say yes, they'd up their GD, 5% of their GDP would go into NATO to pay for it. Trump says he's going to walk away unless you do that, and of course they then agree to do that. They then also sign a deal to buy all their weapons and all their oil from America. And in fact, when you saw von der Leyen's face when she went to Scotland, she looked like she'd been slapped around the face with a wet fish, but she had no choice. And you've got to give it to Trump. I mean, the Americans started a war in Ukraine, and now they're getting Europe to pay for all the weapons to fight it. They're buying all the oil from America, who are getting it through the back door basically what happens, Russia sell it to India, and India are not going to stop buying it. India don't care.
Yeah.
And India then are going to sell that on to other countries, and through a third party, America are going to buy that and then sell it back to Europe.
Honestly, it's literally, it's political musical chairs is what it feels like.
Emma, the problem that we have here, we have such, how can I put this, such mental incompetence inside the European Union that has allowed America to do that.
Yeah. And you mentioned that Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries even before the war started. And this is something that, I mean, even to me, it was a surprise to me because I've only been doing journalism for just over a year now. So I'm still very much learning and still very much kind of finding my way. But yeah, when I started to realize the way that they conscript their soldiers, I mean, the videos are absolutely horrifying. What are some of the things, some of the stories that have come out of Ukraine, particularly about, corruption and things like that, that you think that people should know?
Well, for instance, this started way back. So let's take you through first of all, and it's interesting and very important to know why this is going on, why they're beating people up, throwing them into vans, and then throwing them on the front line in the first week. So let's go through something that is an absolute nonsense here. And there are many, many factors. I speak to International Red Cross people who repatriate the bodies between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And of course, I speak to Ukrainians and Russians on both sides of this conflict. And very simply, when Ukraine started out, they had an army of 82,000 men. Now, in the new peace deal, they want to cut the army down to 660,000. That is quite crazy. And of course, so what happened was at the height of 2023, when they were doing their summer offensive, Ukraine had 1 million men in their army. They then had 1.2 million in reserve. So that gave you 2.2 million. Right. Since then, they've had 3 conscriptions of 1.4 million. That brings it up to 3.6 million. And then you've got to look at the people who have been, should we say, grabbed off the street, which is about 300,000, and about 100,000 mercenary soldiers from all around the world going and joining. So that's an army of 4 million men.
Yeah.
At the point of 1st of January 2025, they only had a total armed forces, including the Air Force and the Navy, of 920,000. Now they're losing about 1,500 soldiers a day. So by August 2026, this war becomes unsustainable. And of course, Russia will start to take more and more land. And now we have and through our figures, we know the exact amount of people that are dying. It's roughly 2.1 million dead, round about 700,000 injured, another 230,000 have literally run away. They fled the army, they've gone AWOL, and of course, and well over 100,000 have surrendered.
Are those figures just for the soldiers, like not including civilian deaths as well for the war?
No, they're just for the They're just for the
Wow.
soldiers.
That is incredible.
And of course, Ukraine now are having to rely very heavily. They're drafting men of over 60. Now, let me say this, Emma, when you have to beat people up and throw them into the vans to go and fight for you, any war that you are engaged in, you've already lost.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you need to. I mean, it used to be. Well, no, I say it used to be, but I mean the way that I always believed it to be before. I suppose I woke up to how corrupt and evil and just straight up satanic the world really is.
Yes.
It used to be a thing of pride to defend your land. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't. That there had to be a respect there of this is my
Yes.
home, therefore I have a
Yeah.
duty to my home and my land and my people. That's what it was about. It's not about being forced into a situation where, because then it doesn't become, you're not fighting for you anymore, you're fighting for me, you're fighting for them, you're fighting for the puppets masters. So, I mean, yeah, the numbers, if you're true, then obviously
astronomical.
mainstream media numbers are just completely off, and like you said, it's not sustainable. Where do you think would be the ideal outcome for this? I mean, what do you think of the 100-year pact?
It's a complete nonsense, of course. And good old Keir Starmer. I mean, he literally couldn't organise a drink in a brewery. He is. I mean, when you consider you make someone like David Lammy your foreign secretary, this is a guy who, remember, thought Marie Antoinette won the Nobel Prize for chemistry.
Yeah.
This is a guy who thought that Henry VIII what came before Henry VII. Just unbelievable if you've ever seen this guy on Mastermind. This is a guy who leaves a mess in the back of a taxi and then gets into a punch-up with somebody because of this. Now, here's where we have a problem. When you're talking about, you'll see all over the internet, Slava Ukraine and everything else. And of course, all these people are not in Ukraine. They're all outside, and there's very much a whole network of social media that is paid for by the European Union, by America, to keep pushing this stuff online. And here's something else to remember. There are 171 Ukrainians that have been now kicked out of America that have been sent back to Ukraine, Ukrainian men. And waiting for them at the border when they arrived, it was the TCC, or the military conscription office.
Wow. You know what? I'd just like to take a second to just thank you. I appreciate really, really so much how you're able to, the way I see it is the way you're able to just kind of grab all this mess and just put it really neatly. And because I mean, I speak to politicians and MPs, and sometimes the way that things are explained, it's very, very technical, and it's almost as if it's made that way to stop you from fully understanding what's really going on.
We have a thing, Emma, it's called Baffle Them with BS.
Well, yeah, I love that, because people like yourself, I mean, it's just, you explain it in a way that everyone can understand, everyone can really, and it cuts through the BS. Like you said, it cuts through the BS. It just gets right to the story, and it's not looking at it on one side or another. It's really taking a broad look at and a deep look into it. So I just wanted to thank you for that, because it's really pleasant to learn from you.
You're welcome.
Behold, I send you out as sheep amidst the wolves.
But a great deal of propaganda is much more hidden, much harder to detect.
Do you know what propaganda means? It's when a cockney has a good look at something.
You'll find that the purpose of most propaganda is to persuade people to believe something.
Propaganda, the new free speech magazine from eSpeaks Freely.
To do something.
Order online, or if you come and find me at a protest,
Or to buy something.
you can get it for free. Comes with free download from freedom band Whom by Fire. Get yours now before they make paper itself a restricted commodity.
The next step, and it's a big one, is to get the facts.
So recently, if we move away from Ukraine slightly, otherwise we're going to end up talking about it for hours
no
at
problem.
this rate.
Yep.
So at the moment, we're seeing a big battle for, who's going to be the next British Prime Minister. Everyone at the moment is thinking that it could even be Rayner. Angela Rayner has obviously made a comeback. I shudder at the thought. Obviously, a lot of people are thinking, hopefully it's going to be Conservative. People are looking at the fringe parties, Reform. Where do you lie on the current political scape? What do you see everything as at the moment?
I think the term lie and politics goes hand in hand there. That's a very good analogy. I don't trust any party. I think independent, the only way you're going to get your sovereignty back is if you have independent candidates who look after their own people in their own boroughs and you vote them in. Everybody's going to toe the party line. At the moment, Farage is the favourite. And of course, they're going after Reform like there's no tomorrow. I mean, you've got Labour turning round and saying, oh, there's a major problem there. We've got a major problem because, of course, Reform of this and Reform of that. But you have to remember that we've got 150 Labour councillors who have committed all sorts of sexual acts that they've never seen the inside of a jail cell for. So I think them trying to come out with the holier than thou attitude when it comes to that, they didn't have a proper independent grooming gangs inquiry because they were not only trying to protect their own people who failed these girls miserably, but they also, the other thing that is really, really bad about this is the simple fact that they also didn't want to raise it because they know that's where most of their voter base is. And that is a problem. The Conservatives are finished. I mean, Kemi Badenoch is just a diversity hire. The next person who should probably be the Labour Prime Minister, I personally don't like him, but he will probably be the next Labour Prime Minister. You have to remember, David Lammy is now the deputy leader.
Yep.
And he, of course, went to the Bilderberg Group in 2024. And, of course, the one who did go to the Bilderberg Group this year and would be the favourite for the Bilderberg and the bankers and everybody else to take over would be Wes Streeting.
Yeah. No, I completely see it, and a lot of people have been also looking at Shabana Mahmood.
Yes.
She's been, you know what? To give her credit, she's playing a clever game, I think. She's towing the line for the left and the right at the moment. But as so many people have tried to do before, that eventually won't work. You can't, do you know what I mean? And unless you are literally creating policy that somehow appeases everyone while still ensuring safety and a booming economy and all these things, you just can't be left and right. It's the same reason why we saw the recent splitting up of the your party, with Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn, and because it was Islam and all the trans stuff that wasn't conflating, which everyone saw coming. I mean, people saw that coming right when they saw, a Queers for Palestine flag. It was always going to go that way. The reason why I bring in more fringe parties like Reform is because at the moment, because they need the additional help, there's donations. And now these are quite hefty donations. Some of them are, millions of pounds. What do you think about donations in party politics? Do you think, because I'm on the fence because I feel like when they're really independent, I kind of feel like, well, you're going to need donations to a certain extent because otherwise, where else are you going to get your money from? But when it's such a large amount of money and it's for specific policies that are wildly controversial, whether you're on the left or the right or however you view things, it becomes a different thing. So I was just wondering how you view it.
Okay, so I'll give you a quick heads up. Watch out for the Green Party. They are getting massive donations under the table, and they are going to be the next party after Reform. And that is very much what, shall we say, the World Economic Forum and the bankers would like, because, of course, you have to remember that with the climate nonsense that goes on, that is worth $17 trillion a year. That's more than literally the American military industrial complex. And it is also, it employs over 3.5 million people worldwide are now with the green companies and everything else that goes on with it. And there's 3.5 million people. This is a $17 trillion industry. And of course, they're going to be pushing this agenda. And here's where we have a problem. When you start taking money from these people, you're then owned by them. One only has to look at Israel. The AIPAC lobby in America is all powerful. If you're not on the side of Israel in America as a politician, you are finished, as Marjorie Taylor Greene and, of course, Matt Gaetz found out as well. If you're not taking money from someone, they very quickly gather together and get rid of you. Jeremy Corbyn was ousted by the Labour Friends of Israel. Now, the money coming from there quite clearly came from Israeli donations. Keir Starmer has taken money from Trevor Chin, as has most of the Labour Party and most of the Conservative Party have been on trips to Israel. Once you start taking money from lobby groups, and whether that be Big Pharma, Keir Starmer's personal private secretary once used to lobby for Big Pharma. So it tells you everything that you need to know. And when you look at these politicians, once you start taking money from these lobbies, they very simply will own you left, right, and centre. And of course, when it comes to voting the way they want you to vote, they will be there to cash in.
Yeah, of course, and this is how this is how things have happened. Like when it came to voting for a grooming gang inquiry, there was restrictions put on the voting process. I mean, again, playing devil's advocate, if I was an MP and I was thinking like, right, I've got a family at home, I've got kids to feed, and if I vote this way, I might lose my job. But do you know what I mean? It is a crappy situation.
Don't become an MP then, Emma. This is the thing.
No. Yeah, I would never.
What I'm saying is, people with a conscience don't become MPs. They may go in there to start, but very, very quickly they get corrupted. And the problem that you have there is, when you look at that, not one Labour MP voted for an independent inquiry into the grooming gangs. Why? Because they knew that a lot of their constituents might fall under the spotlight. It would go down badly in the community, and they want their spoon in the gravy. So they don't want to lose their job. At the end of the day, if you are fearful of the people who are going to control you when you are in that job, don't do that job, because you should not be doing that job if you are going to be compromised in any way, shape or form. Your job or your reason for being there is to govern for the people by proxy of the people. Now, when you are, I don't care, jabbing them up, getting them to put stuff in different color bins, making them pay more for their heating and lighting because you want to have a war in Eastern Europe, or you want to go and do something else, then you should not be in that job.
Yeah, 100%. It's the same thing that we saw during COVID or Convid with nurses in the NHS, doctors being offered, bonuses for, how many vaccines they could administer. So there is money and power. It really seems to be just the root of all evil, especially when it comes to people who are, making policy decisions that involve people's safety, people's money, and especially people's privacy as well. I mean, because obviously doing what you do, you must come up against a lot of censorship, shadow banning, and even obviously with your arrest when it came to the Nazi in Parliament story, persecution. So how have you kind of navigated through that?
Well, I've navigated through that by relocating to another country. I'm now living in the Philippines. So it's also a good place to be here, because obviously the next, shall we say, bad thing that is coming is between USA and China. Yep. So I'm ideally placed. But my wife and my children are here. And of course, coming here, I found a lot more freedom in what I'm able to say. And I think as a journalist, you have to be having a place and a time where you can, as a journalist, you have, and as a politician, you have a duty to the people to tell them exactly what is going on. Now, when you look at Germany, they are locking people up like there's no tomorrow. Merz himself has made over 5,000 complaints to the German police about tweets. In England, we've had over 12,000 cases, which is double any other European country for putting people behind bars. And yet there is a D notice on asking questions about Ukrainian male models and why they were burning Starmer's houses down.
Yeah, we have about, I think it's on average 30 people a week now being arrested for
Yeah.
online crimes and non-crime hate incidents as well is becoming
What is a
a big thing.
non-crime hate?
Well, it ain't a crime, that's for sure. So why does it result in an arrest? I mean, for goodness sake, it's ridiculous. Moving on, as you mentioned that you've escaped to the Philippines. Lucky you, by the way. I mean, I kind of feel like I'm on a sinking ship sometimes staying in the UK. Now, I know that at the moment there is something going on in the Philippines with a scandal and riots regarding flooding.
Yes.
Now, my main coverage is on sort of like the immigration issues and everything. So I'll admit I don't really know anything about it, but I know that you do, and you've been doing a lot of coverage on it. And it seems like, again, there has been, like I said, another scandal. So I was hoping that could you just first of all tell us what's happened? What is the situation?
Yeah, exactly. So there's a major problem in the Philippines that when it floods, now we've got a bit of a problem also with Duterte and Marcos Jr. as well. But first, let's get to the flooding first of all. So what you have is in the Philippines, when you get the monsoons, the streets flood, and in Manila it can be anywhere. If it's a bad typhoon or whatever, you may get 4 or 5 of these a year. And of course, they're like your hurricanes over there.
Yeah.
Only sometimes they're even stronger. Now, what happens is very quickly, Manila, which is Metro Manila, which is obviously the capital, floods with water very quickly and goes up maybe even 10 or 12 feet deep.
Wow.
And of course, this can kill people, and in many, many islands as well. That they have a set of mountains called the Sierra Madres, and most of the typhoons come along that path. They hit the Sierra Madres, they get destroyed or they survive. But what they do is dump an enormous amount of water on these mountains. And then eventually that water has to come somewhere. And of course, when they're cutting down all the trees to put up wind turbines, there's no trees to take the moisture.
Yeah.
So there was meant to be a project where billions were given to make a drainage system much, much better. And of course, that money in the Philippines, it's not a case of are the politicians corrupt? It's which level of corruption are they? And of course, then of course there started to be all sorts of, shall we say, riots and everything else. And the simple reason is because not only does the floodwater kill you, but also then you get rats in the floodwater and snakes as well. So there's more than just, shall we say, just the floodwater that you've got to worry about. And the problem also as well is there is a lot of corruption in the building. So it's the same sort of thing as Ukraine. But you have Duterte and Marcos. Now, Duterte is very pro-Chinese, Marcos very pro-USA.
Right.
Now, Marcos had Duterte flown from the Philippines to the ICC in The Hague to be arrested there, even though the Philippines is not a signatory to the ICC, okay, to get rid of his opposition. And then Zara Duterte, who is his daughter, he's tried to have her impeached on a couple of occasions, trying to get rid of anybody that is in the way for the larger picture, which is coming down the line with the Chinese and over Taiwan in 2027, 2028. So get rid of anybody who might be pro-China so that we just keep our American base here.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that's some corruption there. So, I mean, well, I guess my next question was going to be more going into the riots, but we'll get back to that. I mean, you've gone from one really corrupt country to one that is maybe a bit more. What's going on there?
Well, the whole idea is not only is my family here, but I'm also very well placed for what I know is coming. It's like when I left England, I knew that the what was going to happen in England was going to get worse and worse and worse in terms of freedoms and
Yeah.
everything else. So it seemed like the right time. Not only that, I wanted to be with the family, and they wanted me here. So it was
I
like,
see. I thought your family had gone with you. I wasn't aware they were already there. That makes more sense.
no, they were already here, but of course it was a thing of earning enough money to be able to make
Yeah.
sure I was financially okay. Now the thing was, it was a Hobson's choice really. And then what you look at then is what is going to happen in 27, 28. Looking ahead, there is going to be elections in Taiwan. They do not want a pro-Chinese government in Taiwan. America want to put this sort of belt, a blockade around China. There's already clashes between boats from the Philippines and China. Japan are talking about putting missiles on islands pointing at Taiwan just in case there's any problem. So this situation is bubbling up, ready for the elections, which are at the end of 2027, the start of 2028.
Yeah. Now we've got Russia and Ukraine. We've got now we've got what's going on in the Philippines, Taiwan, China. We've got
Venezuela.
Palestine, Israel, Venezuela. At what point do we just say the world is at war?
It pretty much is. I mean, let's face it. There are proxy wars going all over the place. Thailand, Cambodia kicked off just yesterday. Kicked off again with bombings by Thailand on Cambodia. Now, Cambodia is part of that first blockade that the Americans want on China, so that makes sense. And of course, when you look at Venezuela, the oil reserves in Venezuela are massive, and if America, they already have pretty much a lot of control there, but if they get full control of that, then they've got resources. What we're looking at is China, Russia, and America playing out a sort of game where everybody else is a pawn. They want BRICS destroyed. They want China and Russia corralled, so that America really don't make anything anymore. So of course they can't generate the same sort of wealth and the same sort of, shall we say, production that China and Russia do. So this is very much we're sort of living through a new dark ages, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it certainly does feel that way. Just getting back to the Philippines flood scandal, just really quickly before we move on. What have you seen in terms of riots? What kind of scale is it? Have you been out on the ground, or has it mainly been secondhand source?
There's been petrol bombs. There's been beatings with clubs and police with riot shields and everything else. It's died down a bit now, but the protests are still going on, even though they're more peaceful, because they arrested the person who they say is responsible for the corruption. But of course, this is one of those where you throw somebody under the bus, like they've thrown Ukrainians under the bus and saying they're responsible for all the corruption. It was all them. And of course, then nobody else looks at anybody else in the Philippines that has been party to this corruption, the same as in Ukraine, where, of course, almost every single politician is corrupt.
Well, I was just about to say, I mean, because you've drawn parallels between what we might be able to call the ghost flood projects and the aid kind of going into Ukraine. What do you think that this says about Western-backed regimes and I guess Western-backed projects? We just don't seem to be able to get our crap together.
Well, no, we're always trying to overthrow on behalf of America. I mean, look what's happening in Georgia. Look what's happening in Georgia at the moment. They're still trying to get hold of Georgia. Why? Because Georgia is a vital gateway to the edge of Russia and also the Black Sea. And of course, they're now, America have just done a land lease with Armenia and Azerbaijan for a place called the Zangezur Corridor, which borders on Iran, would you believe? So, of course, lots of black ops can go in there, start blowing things up as they try to get regime change there. So it is very much along the lines of we were stupid enough in the West to believe. Henry Kissinger once turned around and said, to be an enemy of America is a dangerous thing. To be a friend of America is absolutely lethal. And he's completely right, because Europe have allowed themselves to be led by the nose. Now, say, for instance, you have a neighbor, Emma, and I literally come to you and I say, your neighbor is absolutely terrible. I'm going to give you lots of money and this, that, and the other. Your neighbor gets upset with this and he doesn't want you extending your boundary of your ground and encroaching on his property or encroaching closer to him. And of course, the neighbor is stronger than you. He decides to fight back. Then they come to you and they say, we will give you your electricity at 4 times the price that you pay for it, and we'll also give you 4 times the price of the weapons to defend yourself. Would you take that? Of course you wouldn't. The European Commission and the European Union was stupid enough to do that.
Yeah. But this is where we're at now. Everything is so, what I would describe as papered in, that it's almost just dulled down basic natural instinct and logic. It's the same behavioral change that we've seen within government over the years that's allowed fathers to be put in jail for beating up their child's
Yeah.
rapist. Do you know, it's that same kind of like
Yeah.
twisted, like we just do still understand basic instinct, but that is very much dwindling from underneath us.
It is because we put people in. These people haven't been put in the European Union because they've got a towering intellect,
Yeah.
and they haven't been put in. They haven't been made prime ministers because they've got a towering intellect. If you go and have a look, most of these people have never done any diplomacy in their life. Most of them are either former solicitors or former bankers. Go and have a look Canada. Go and have a look UK. Go and have a look Germany. BlackRock, Mertz. Go and look at Canada. Carney was a banker. You go and look at Starmer. He was a solicitor. If you go and look at most of these people, they've never climbed the political ladder and learned to deal with diplomacy and everything else. These people like David Lammy, Angela Rayner, these people aren't in power because they're very, very bright. These people are in power because they will say yes to the powers that be that really run.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, this goes great into my next question as well, is I believe you've coined the term coalition of the clueless. And who are the key players in this and why?
So you've got Ursula von der Leyen, who is wrapped up in the Pfizer scandal. You have to remember that her husband, of course, was in charge of a huge drugs company, and she bought 8 shots for every single person in Europe with European money. And of course, those text messages have either gone missing or they're too boring to read out. How odd. And then we've got Kaya Kallis, who has literally a loathing of Russia like you wouldn't believe. And so much so, she's been coming out with unbelievably stupid statements. You've got Macron, who is literally, he's had one phone call with Putin, which lasted about 15 minutes. It went that badly that Putin ended up putting the phone down on him. Kaya Kallis put herself forward in an argument with Macron to who should negotiate with the Russians. Now, Kaya Kallis is the head of the European Commission. She was so incensed that China was still going to stay friends with Russia. In her gesticulations, she knocked a cup of coffee over Wang Yi, who's the top Chinese diplomat, while they were in meetings and discussions. Ursula von der Leyen went to China to do the same thing. She ended up getting told to go home, and she was actually searched on the way through customs, which doesn't normally happen to diplomats. And of course, every time an Annalena Baerbock decided to go there and lecture the Chinese stopped the press conference, stopped the meeting, and sent her home. So these people, and now she is in charge. Would you believe she's the secretary of the United Nations, which is quite incredible. So when you see these players, as long as they are willing to do the bidding, they don't have to be clever. Orban is probably the most centered of all the people that are there. And time after time, shall we say, the corruption, the money and the corruption. If you think Ukraine is bad, if you think the Philippines is bad, the level of corruption in the European Union, of course, is off the charts. And now they want to steal the Russian assets from Euroclear in Belgium. Belgium have reacted by having Kaya Kallis's former, the former head of the European Commission, Kaya Kallis's friend, arrested on corruption charges. So the Belgians have struck back with the police going into the European Commission offices in Brussels and arresting people and taking away files. That is a clear message from Belgium going, we are not giving you the frozen Russian assets, because what happens is Russia win the war. Everybody knows that they will. And then, of course, the EU turn around and go, well, yes, you did use the frozen Russian assets and we asked you to. But at the end of the day, it was your decision. It's nothing to do with us. And then, of course, Euroclear goes bankrupt. The whole of Belgium's economy collapses and Europe don't bail them out.
Are you keeping an eye on Zelensky and Netanyahu's relationship?
Yes, absolutely. But what you have to remember is that Israel and Ukraine are very much linked when you go back to the Khazarians and everything else.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you have to remember is that, of course, Netanyahu, or Israel's government, gave Ukraine 10 million to build another runway just so they could have a pilgrimage to a dead Ukrainian rabbi, a Jewish rabbi, or a Zionist rabbi, I should say. And there is a shrine built to him. They gave 10 million to Zelensky just to build another runway so they could have private pilgrimages to that site. And if you think Ukraine and Israel are not inexorably linked, they are. There are 25,000 Ukrainians living in Israel at the moment.
25,000? I didn't know it was that many.
Yes.
Wow. And you've discussed NATO American genocide. Was that what you were referring to earlier with the Americans, like, these mercenary soldiers and the Americans being involved in all these kind of dodgy moving things around in Ukraine? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, very simply, what they're doing is throwing the Ukrainians under the bus. They were stupid enough to believe, and of course, when they put this corrupt regime in, of course, everybody saw the money. They don't care how many Ukrainians die. Americans, if you see Lindsey Graham, who is once again inexorably linked to Israel, he actually in 2017 told the Ukrainians it's time to go on the offensive in a visit to the Azov battalion. And of course, he said with John McCain, we're going to go back to Washington and get you the money. This was back in 2017. I've got the video of this, of him actually talking. And he actually turned around and said, we'll go and get the money. You carry on the fight. And he's actually visited Ukraine and said, good day. Russians are dying. Doesn't matter that Ukrainians are dying. Ukrainians are expendable because it's not American soldiers. It's not British soldiers, not German soldiers, not French soldiers coming back in body bags. It's, as far as the Americans are concerned, it's Ukrainians. Who cares?
Yeah. And because again, we've kind of got this thing of in the mainstream, it's all Russia bad, Ukraine poor little good guy. And then when you actually look at the Ukrainian government and you see how corrupt it is there, and the sympathy shifts to the people who are, like you said, they're just getting thrown on the front line, just one after the other, with little to no real training. How do you combat people? Because, I mean, people Google you and it comes up with, like, it's a Kremlin propagandist and all this sort of stuff. But then you are talking about the real Ukrainian plight, which is not that of the government, but that of the people. So what would you say to people that would call you a Kremlin propagandist?
Well, the trouble is, it's a very, very easy trope to use, isn't it? Now, at the end of the day, if the Russians are wrong, and I have called out the Russians for doing some things that they shouldn't have been doing. They were shooting drone operators, executing them. And I've got no problem calling them out. But the reason they were executing them, because they saw that video, obviously, of the man, the dog, and the woman, where the Ukrainian drone just literally hovered right next to the woman who was kneeling down praying, and then killed her, just murdered her outright. And I've called out the Russians on many occasions, and the Chinese. I'm not a big fan of the Russians, but I am not a big fan either of people who line up, having been a former soldier, people who line up their own citizens to be butchered, while their own children, like Klitschko, all three children born at Mount Sinai Hospital in America, all three of his children, and the powerful elite, their children are all in Monaco. Did you know that 50% of the supercars in Monaco have Ukrainian plates?
Really? Interesting, that, isn't it?
Mm. None of the children that are to do with any of the government are on the front lines. None of them.
But this is the way it always is. This is why I think, and don't get me wrong, my opinion on Harry and Prince Harry has changed a lot over the years since Meghan's come into the picture. But I remember as a kid growing up, one of the things that I loved about him was seeing him as a soldier and being like, okay, well, great. You know what? Bloody good for you. Fighting for your country when you know that you absolutely do not have to, given the position that you're in. And obviously now I might have a different opinion on it, but that was the way I saw it at the time. And it is this trope of like, well, this is your country as well. Are we just expected to do our defending ourselves and you? Why are you not defending?
It's a nonsense that they come out with, Emma, because when they use this trope, it's like saying racist or anti-Semite. The moment you point out the actual reality of the situation, it's the only place they can go because they don't have any facts to back it up. If you turn around and you say, they have said for 3 years Ukraine are winning, they're not. Okay? They have said for years that millions of Russians are dying. They're not. The reality of the situation is Russians are not putting 60-year-old men on the front line and beating them up to chuck them onto the front line. They're saying, the Russians aren't moving forward very fast. They don't have to. They're throwing the Ukrainians at them, and they just make this cauldron. They leave one road open, and rather than waste all their men, The Russians leave one road open for the Ukrainians to go back and forth, and they just pick them off with drones and artillery. And it saves Russian lives, and very quickly they're able to take over towns and cities and everything else. We cannot beat Russia in a war. We have 73,000 men in the British Army. If we sent them into these trenches, these god-awful trenches in Ukraine, I'll give you, for instance, in the Battle of Bakhmut, which Russia took over in 2023, 120,000 Ukrainian soldiers died in 8 months.
Oh,
The
wow.
British Army would be destroyed in 6 months in one of those battles.
It's just incredible. Yeah, I saw something on the news recently. There was like our ready army, as in the boots on the ground that are actually ready to go at the drop of a hat tomorrow, doesn't even fill a full football pitch.
You would run out. You would run it. Also, not only that, you would run out of artillery inside about 10 days.
It's just shocking.
The Russians can fly 1,000 of those Garand drones, not the normal everyday drones, but 1,000 of those Garand drones every single day. We can't match that.
No, not at all. So I'm just aware of time, and just to bring things to a close, I was hoping if you had, because again, you've come through so many obstacles, you're absolutely fantastic at disseminating the information and bringing it all together and just laying it out in a really easy to understand way, which is what the public needs at the moment. What advice do you have to other journalists, or maybe up and coming journalists, young journalists like myself, advice on how to get to be as knowledgeable as you are on these types of things?
I would say with this is sort of have a lot of contact, or have contacts if you can, with as many people in positions of power that don't necessarily think that we're right all the time. And when you get that, you can get lots of information. But the other thing I would say is question absolutely everything. When somebody turns around and says for instance, if someone out there says you're a Kremlin propagandist, go and check who's saying that, why they're saying that. Do they have the same contacts as the person that they're saying it about, or are they being paid, or are they just have no knowledge whatsoever? 9 times out of 10, you will find 50% of them have no idea, don't have the first clue what they're talking about. They just listen to whatever noise is coming out of their TV or their newspapers or their radio, and it is constant, to be fair to them. And then the other 50%, of course, you can track who pays them. Like you have, for instance, there is, if you go onto Twitter, go and have a look at an organization called NAFO. Now, you would think they're very, very fluffy. They're the North Atlantic Fella Organization, and they support Ukraine. And they have a little dog that they have as their mascot. Now, Kaya Kallis and even a Republican Senator, Kinzinger, has praised these people. But they actually fundraise money for the Azov Battalion, who are literally neo-Nazis, to fund this war. And of course, they have a huge online presence. But most of this money that they keep going with has UK aid or USAID. So very simply, I would say there are 3 things to be a very good journalist, and never ever mind what anybody else says. Do your own research and question everything. Number 2 is look at the timing. Why is it happening now? And number 3, follow the money. Always follow the money. If you stick to those 3 things, any budding journalist out there, you will start to become very knowledgeable very, very quickly.
Brilliant. And could you just tell everyone where they can find you, where they can find your work? Obviously, we have warrenthornton.com at the top of the screen there, but also just tell everyone what it is you're working on at the moment and why they should come and check you out.
Yeah, well, tonight we'll be talking about the American strategy peace deal that's just been released by Donald Trump and why it's an absolute disaster for Europe. You can find us over on Patreon. You type in Warren Thornton. You can come and subscribe to the show. We have a show Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. and on a Sunday, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. With the odd guest. And of course, thankfully, you can see shows like this on there as well. We will put that online so that you can see it. And of course, there is a newsletter and everything else as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Warren. I really appreciate it.
More than well. Thank you very much for taking the time to listening to my ramblings.
Thank you.